The 2023 NFL Draft is loaded at the wide receiver position. While some say there is no elite talent, there is apparently a ton of depth, and there are many receiver prospects who are generating a lot of buzz, and we have truly no idea where these receivers are going to get taken. In today's video, I want to spotlight a couple of these wide receiver prospects from this year's draft who are generating a lot of buzz, go through who they are, and see if any of them have a case at being the top prospect in this year's draft. But before we get started, be sure to leave a like if you want to support today's video, turn on post notifications so you never miss when I upload, subscribe if you're new, and let me know what player, team, topic, or draft prospect I can cover in my next video. Now, let's go ahead and get started. First player I want to spotlight is Jaxon Smith Njigba. He's become one of the more forgotten receiver prospects in this year's draft, solely because he was injured for the 2022 season. Going back in time, he grew up in Rockwall, Texas, and apparently made an incredible impression on the coaching staff as just a freshman. Because of that, he played on varsity as a true freshman in high school, and athletics ran in his family as his brother actually played for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Eventually, Jaxon would blow up as a junior, finishing with 97 catches for nearly 2,000 yards and 20 touchdowns. His senior year, he put up even more absurd stats, but for Rockwall, he finished with 5,346 receiving yards, 82 touchdowns, and was third in Texas high school football history in receiving yards. Because of that, he ended up committing to Ohio State over TCU, Notre Dame, Nebraska, and Baylor, and he had plenty of other offers as well. He ended up being ranked as a 5-star recruit, the number 5 receiver, and the 29th best player in the class of 2020, according to 24/7 Sports. When he arrived at Ohio State, he had a decent amount of hype, but he wouldn't play a whole lot in 2020 because he was buried on the depth chart behind some super talented guys. He most notably had an insane one-footed touchdown catch, but 2021 would be his time to shine. Despite having Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave on the roster, Smith Njigba finished with 95 catches for 1,606 yards and 9 touchdowns. He had one of the best seasons in Ohio State football history and was arguably the best receiver in college football. That's why he had a ridiculous amount of hype going into 2022, but unfortunately, he struggled with injury the entirety of the season and ended up only making 5 catches for 43 yards. That hamstring injury limited him to 3 games, but he is still supposed to be a first-round pick. So where's he going to go in this year's draft? Well, most recently, Mel Kiper had the Seahawks taking him with the 20th overall pick, and The Athletic has JSN as their consensus number 10 overall prospect. There's pretty much nothing that JSN can't do, and he recorded the fastest shuttle time over the last 5 drafts as well. He has the athleticism, the insane stats, and the potential to be a great NFL receiver, but the one question mark around his game will definitely be those injury concerns and maybe his height. JSN definitely has a case to be the top receiver prospect in this year's draft. The next player I want to touch on is Josh Downs from North Carolina, who's been one of the best receivers in college football over the last 2 years. Going back in time, football ran in the family, as his dad Gary was a running back at NC State and played 6 years in the NFL after becoming a 3rd-round draft pick in 1994. Just like his father, both him and his brother Caleb became football stars early on. Caleb Downs, in fact, is so insane that he's a 5-star Alabama freshman and was considered the top safety in the class of 2023. Right now, though, Josh is the better player. Eventually, he'd get to North Gwinnett High School in Georgia, where he combined for 100 catches for 1,643 yards and 18 touchdowns in his last 2 years there. Because of that and his elite track speed, he was considered a 4-star recruit and received national recruiting attention. He eventually chose North Carolina over his dad's alma mater in NC State, Georgia Tech, and Michigan. According to 24/7 Sports, Down was a big deal. He was a 4-star recruit, the number 17 receiver, and the 95th best player in the class of 2020. Downs would arrive at North Carolina with a considerable amount of hype, but really didn't get to play much in 2020. As we know, they had those 2-star running backs in Michael Carter and Javonte Williams, and 2 elite receivers in Daz Newsome and De'Ami Brown. Because of that, Downs would not really get to play until their bowl game, where against Texas A&M, he ended up catching 4 passes for 91 yards and 2 touchdowns. That was the moment he realized he belonged on the biggest stage. The following year, Sam Howell was back, but both those 2 receivers were gone to the NFL, so Downs would have to step up. What did he do? He went insane. He ended up catching 101 passes for 1,335 yards and 8 touchdowns. He became one of the best receivers in college football and had one of the best regular seasons in North Carolina football history. Because of his great 2021 year, he had a lot of hype for 2022. This time he'd have a new quarterback in Drake May, but his production would not really fall off at all. He ended up finishing with 94 receptions for 1,029 yards and 11 touchdowns. He He became the second receiver in North Carolina history to have back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, and in just 3 years, he rose to number 4 on the all-time receiving list and number 2 overall in touchdowns. His 11 touchdowns in 2022 was second amongst all Power 5 receivers, and his 97.6 yards per game was third amongst all Power 5 receivers. Because of that, he decided to declare for the 2023 NFL Draft, and he's been considered a first or second round prospect all along. Recently, former Carolina Panthers legend Steve Smith Sr. says Downs has the playmaking ability of a magician and compared him to Santana Moss. If he's anything like that, then he will be a steal. Overall, according to scouts, Downs is a quick, smooth pass-catching player with natural receiving skills and impressive route running. His size would put him in the slot. Recently, according to the NFL mock draft database, he's projected to be at the end of the first round, as you guys can tell based on the graphic on the screen. And while he may not be the number 1 wide receiver prospect in this year's draft, he could definitely be the most underrated prospect right now, and he can make teams look foolish for not taking him higher. Right now, I'd still rank him behind JSN, but Downs is definitely a sleeper and should hear his name called on opening night of this year's draft. The next guy I want to highlight has one of the best stories in this year's draft, and that is Charlie Jones from Purdue. There may not be a prospect in this year's draft who gambled on his own talent more than he did, as coming out of Deerfield High School, he struggled with injury and played in the triple option system, so he did not get a chance to get any Power 5 offers. He eventually had to go to Buffalo over offers from Ball State, Bowling Green, Northern Illinois, Western Michigan, and Wyoming, and Lance Leipold had found a hidden gem in Jones. According to 24/7 Sports, he was listed as a 2-star recruit, the number 442 wide receiver, and the 3,165th best player in the class of 2017. That Buffalo team was led by star quarterback Tyree Jackson, and the team went 10-4. He also played with future Vikings wide receiver KJ Osborne, but he thought he could play at a higher level than the MAC, so he entered the transfer portal. He thought he'd get offers from Big Ten or SEC schools, but instead, he decided to walk on at Iowa to try to make a name for himself in the Big Ten. While he was beginning his career at Iowa, he actually used a robotic quarterback machine to perfect his catching and receiving game, and this is part of the reason why he got so much better. He eventually got on the field in 2021 for Iowa, catching 21 passes for 323 yards and 3 touchdowns. He wasn't really getting much of a chance as a receiver though, as he was more of a return specialist, and in fact was actually the Big Ten return specialist of the year in 2021. He did make his way up to number 3 on the depth chart in terms of receiver, but he would make one final transfer for his final year of eligibility. He got a couple of offers in the portal, but he saw what Rondale Moore and David Bell did at Purdue and decided he was going to go there. It also helped that he'd reunite with his former childhood friend Aiden O'Connell, who just so happened to be the quarterback at Purdue as well. How did Jones end up doing? Well, all he did was have an insane year. He finished the season with 110 catches for 1,361 yards and 12 touchdowns. He ended up leading the nation in catches, came in second in receiving yards, and was 5th in touchdown catches. He didn't end up having any eligibility anyways, but right now he's one of the buzzier names in the 2023 NFL Draft. He ran a blazing 40-yard dash time, and has continued to impress GMs and scouts with his work ethic, his story, and his potential transition to the NFL. By no means is he supposed to be a first-round pick, but he is one of the better bodies of work of any receiver in this year's draft class, and will likely be called on day 2. I just wanted to highlight his story, and he really is an insane player. The final player I'm going to talk about today is TCU wide receiver Quentin Johnston. Growing up in Texas, I couldn't find a whole lot of information about his early years, but he did apparently grow up in a military family, which helped make him the person he is today. He became a wide receiver once he got to high school, and was quickly labeled as a top 100 player in the recruiting process. He was very quiet about his situation, but he eventually decided to commit to Texas. He chose the Longhorns over TCU, Baylor, and Oklahoma, and it was for both football and academic reasons. Eventually, though, his lead recruiter at Texas decided to leave, so Johnston decided to leave as well. He decided to flip to TCU, and this was one of the biggest gets in TCU history. While at Temple High School, he was labeled as a 4-star recruit, a number 14 receiver, and the 71st best player in the class of 2020. In 2020, Johnston would get an opportunity to see the field as he caught 22 passes for 487 yards and 2 touchdowns, having one of the best freshman seasons in Horned Frog history. In 2021, he would return and built upon his promising first year. He finished with 33 catches for 612 yards and 6 scores, and while he did battle injury, it was still a somewhat disappointing season for Johnston. If he could put it all together in 2022, though, he could be a first-round pick and one of the top players in the country. That is exactly what he did. Johnston would end up finishing with 60 catches for 1,069 yards and 6 touchdowns, while leading the TCU Horned Frogs to the national championship game. While they ended up getting embarrassed by Georgia, it was still a terrific season for Johnston, and scouts were unbelievably high on him. Right now, according to NFL Mock Draft Database, Johnston is the number 16 overall prospect, and according to The Athletic, he is the 8th best prospect. There seems to be some debate as to who is the top receiver prospect in this year's draft, but many seem to side with Johnston. He is your prototypical big-bodied receiver with good hands and good athletic traits, and right now he is compared to T. Higgins. He's one of those guys that if he can be developed properly, could be by far the best receiver in this year's draft class, and while there are a few concerns about him, probably the top prospect in this year's draft right now, and I'm very curious to see how he's going to do next year. So yeah, in today's video we highlighted 4 of the top receiver draft prospects in this year's class, went through who they were and where I think they'll end up, and in your eyes, which one is the best of the 4, and who is your favorite receiver in this year's draft? Be sure to let me know who I should cover in my next video, what player or topic I should do a video on next, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and check out all the videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.